I speak 5 languages.
I'll kneel at your feet if you speak 5 languages.
The ballroom shimmered like a golden ocean. Laughter, music, and the soft clink of crystal filled the air, thick with perfume and pride. In the middle of it all, a young maid stood frozen, holding a silver tray that trembled in her hands. "I speak 5 languages, sir," she said quietly. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in laughter. "But before we go on, we'd love to know, where are you listening from? Follow our channel so you don't miss a single story. We're here to share emotional, dramatic tales, but also to brighten your day and remind you that there is always hope." Daniel Harrington, billionaire philanthropist and master of ceremonies, threw his head back and laughed, voice echoing off the marble. "I'll kneel at your feet if you speak 5 languages," he mocked, savoring every syllable. The guests roared again, their laughter bouncing through the chandelier light like cruel applause. Emily Cruz didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, but her hands shook. Under the golden glare, no one saw the years of struggle behind her eyes. No one saw the book she'd read in secret, the words she had whispered to herself late at night to stay alive. To them, she was invisible. Just the help, another woman in a uniform polishing the glasses they'd raised to celebrate themselves. Across the room, Daniel's daughter Ava watched in silence. She was dressed in midnight blue, her beauty softened by discomfort. She looked away, pretending not to see. Beside the door, the Haitian guard, Jean-Baptiste Lafleur, stood tall and still. His eyes followed Emily with quiet understanding. He had seen humiliation before. He knew its weight. Under the chandeliers, the laughter faded. Emily adjusted the tray in her hands, the metal cold against her skin. Her breath came slow, careful. She turned toward the kitchen, her steps steady. But as she walked away, someone behind her spoke one word that sliced through the music. "Contract." No one noticed her pause. No one saw the spark in her eyes. But fate did. That one word would change everything. Inside the kitchen, the world was smaller, fluorescent light, the smell of soap, the clatter of dishes. Emily set down the tray and pressed her hand to the worn German dictionary she carried in her purse. The corners were frayed, the pages soft from years of use. On the last one, written in pencil, was a phrase she knew by heart. "Speak, even if the world doesn't understand yet." She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. Klein. I'm not done speaking." The sound of clinking glass carried her back years, to a dusty courtyard in Oaxaca. She was 15 again, her mother coughing in the next room, the dry wind rattling the tin roof. When her mother became too weak to work, Emily received a letter, a housekeeper's position in Mexico City. The sender was an old widow named Marta Klein. The first time Emily knocked on that door, a pale woman with tired blue eyes answered. "You must be Emily," she said softly. "Come in, it's cold." Marta Klein had once lived in Berlin. She spoke with a careful accent and carried sadness like a shawl. She saw in Emily something she recognized. Hunger, not for food, but for meaning. At night, after dinner, she'd find the girl reading the labels on jars, whispering unfamiliar words. One evening, she placed a German book in Emily's hands and said, "You don't need to understand. Just read. The music of the words will teach you." Emily began to read aloud, stumbling at first, then stronger. The sounds were strange, beautiful. Marta corrected her gently night after night. Language became their bridge, and soon, their friendship. Marta told her stories of snowy winters and crowded cafes, of people who spoke too fast and loved too hard. She told her that language could be a kind of light, something no one could take away. A year later, Marta died in her sleep. In her dresser drawer, Emily found a note tucked inside the old German dictionary. The handwriting was thin but firm. "Sprich, auch wenn die Welt dich nicht versteht." Speak, even if the world doesn't understand you. Emily kept that book like a relic. She carried it through every job, every insult, every night she went to bed too tired to dream. Years later, she would find herself in New York, mopping floors in a run-down hostel near Penn Station. The city taught her more languages, the voices of travelers echoing through hallways at 3 in the morning. She learned English from radio talk shows, practiced pronunciation between sweeping and scrubbing. When she cleaned the kitchen, she'd repeat words under her breath, letting them sink into muscle memory. One night, a young Australian tourist stumbled in and said, "Do you clean every night?" "Yes," Emily answered, her accent heavy but her tone proud. "Every night." The girl smiled. "Your English is good." It was the first time anyone had told her that. From then on, she kept the English radio playing low while she worked. She started to understand jokes, lyrics, even the rhythm of the news anchors' voices. Slowly, English stopped being noise. It became home. A few months later, she met Ava Harrington for the first time. It was raining hard. They both stood under a bus stop, Ava holding a folder of music that was getting soaked. Emily pulled a plastic bag from her purse and offered it to protect the papers. "Thank you," Ava said, surprised. "Not everyone would stop." "You looked like you needed help," Emily replied. They rode the same bus for a few stops, speaking little. Ava mentioned she studied music and that her father could be difficult. When they parted, she touched Emily's arm and said, "You have a strong look. Don't lose it." That phrase stayed with her. That night in her blue notebook, the one where she wrote every new word she learned, she added 2 more. Strong look. Months later, a French guest at the hostel left behind a small dictionary. Inside was a note that read, "For seeing the world through different words." She smiled, pocketed it, and began whispering French to herself as she mopped. "Bonjour. Merci, s'il vous plaît." Words became wings, carrying her from one language to another. But the most beautiful language she learned wasn't spoken at all. Her younger sister, Luz, could not hear. Through her, Emily discovered American Sign Language. Together, they built their own world of gestures and light, hands dancing in rhythm to emotions instead of sound. Silence, Emily realized, was also a kind of speech, one the heart understood best. In the small apartment they shared, the roof leaked when it rained, and the air smelled of soap and old hope. Yet every night before bed, Emily would trace her fingers over Marta Klein's phrase and whisper, "One day, I'll speak so the world has to listen." That day was closer than she knew. When the notice came about a charity gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation, she applied for a temporary job as part of the cleaning staff. The pay was high, just for one night. She didn't know that Jean-Baptiste worked security for the same event. When she saw him at the entrance in his black uniform, he smiled. "The world is small, my friend," he said in French. "Too small." She laughed softly. He wished her luck, not knowing how much she would need it. Inside, the mansion glowed with chandeliers and champagne. Guests laughed, cameras flashed, the string quartet played something expensive. The air smelled of arrogance dressed as success. And that was when everything began. The laughter, the humiliation, the sentence that would awaken the woman no one had ever truly seen. "I speak 5 languages, sir." And this time, the world would remember it. Morning arrived like a stranger in the Harrington mansion, quiet and heavy. The ballroom still carried the perfume of last night's laughter. Empty glasses glittered under the early light, a kingdom of forgotten pride. Emily came in early, her uniform freshly pressed, her eyes red from a sleepless night. The words she had overheard in German still burned behind her ribs. From the corridor, Karen Pierce's voice sliced the silence. She was the head of the domestic staff, elegant, cold, and endlessly cruel to anyone who couldn't afford to answer back. "Mr. Harrington will be inspecting the property today," she said sharply to the team. "I don't want a single mistake. And keep the new girl away from the executive wing." Emily kept her head down and nodded, but something inside her refused to shrink anymore. She polished the glasses, wiped the counters, folded linen with precision. The house glittered again, pretending to be perfect. By noon, Daniel Harrington and his business partner, Klaus Brenner, arrived with folders under their arms. They were surrounded by assistants, their suits gleaming, their smiles practiced. Brenner's English carried a smooth European arrogance that made every sentence sound like an insult wrapped in silk. He caught Emily's gaze as she refilled their coffee. "Beautiful house, yes?" he said, his accent thick. "You must be proud to work here." "I'm just doing my job," Emily replied quietly. "That's what everyone says," Brenner smirked, "when they don't understand what's really happening." Emily looked away, pretending not to hear the threat hidden beneath his tone. A few hours later, Karen entered the staff locker room carrying a small white box. Her eyes darted quickly around, checking who was there. No one paid her much attention. Moments later, the security alarm sounded in the east corridor. Within minutes, the staff were called together. Jean-Baptiste stood by the door, looking uneasy. Karen stepped into the center, holding a clipboard like a judge. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with false sadness, "it seems a piece of Mrs. Harrington's diamond jewelry is missing. A bracelet." Murmurs spread among the employees. Karen turned her sharp gaze toward Emily. "By protocol," she said, "we'll need to check everyone's personal belongings." The blood drained from Emily's face. Still, she opened her purse. Inside, next to her German dictionary, something glittered. A silver bracelet. I don't know how that got there," she whispered, her voice trembling. Karen's tone dripped with satisfaction. "How unfortunate." Jean-Baptiste stepped forward. "Let me see." He took the bracelet gently, turning it in his hand, his eyes narrowing. "This wasn't here before," he said firmly. Karen crossed her arms. "And how would you know that?" "Because I checked her bag when she came in," he replied evenly. "It was empty." Daniel Harrington entered just then, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening here?" Karen sighed dramatically. "Sir, we found a missing bracelet in this woman's purse." Daniel's expression turned cold. "Is that true?" "No, sir," Emily said quickly. "I didn't take anything." Before Daniel could speak, Brenner appeared at the door, smiling faintly. "There's always a first time," he said under his breath. Emily felt her body stiffen. All eyes were on her, waiting. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "Escort her out," Daniel ordered finally. "We'll sort this out later." "Sir, maybe we should check the cameras," Jean-Baptiste started, but Karen interrupted. "No need for drama." Daniel sighed, waving his hand dismissively. "Enough. Just take her out of here." Emily stood frozen for a moment. Then she lifted her chin, nodded once, and walked toward the exit. As she passed Jean-Baptiste, he made a small sign with his fingers, the same silent language she used with her sister. Resist. Outside, the sky was gray, swollen with rain. She walked for miles before she realized she was crying. When she reached her apartment, Luce was waiting at the window. The moment she saw her sister's face, she ran and asked with her hands, "What happened?" Emily tried to smile. Her fingers moved shakily. They lied. She signed. "They took everything from me again." Luce touched her cheek gently. "Don't let them take your voice, too." There was a knock at the door. Jean-Baptiste stood outside, rain dripping from his shoulders. "I looked at the cameras," he said softly. "I saw Karen put the box in the locker room before the inspection. 5 minutes later, the bracelet was in your bag." Emily stared at him, hope flickering behind her exhaustion. "Can you prove it?" "I couldn't save the footage earlier," he said. "But tonight, when the system resets, I can copy it." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "But that won't be enough, Emily. They'll say it's fake. You need to show the world who they really are. She frowned. How? Tomorrow, he said, is the press conference for the foundation contract. Brenner will speak again. He always switches to German when he wants to hide something. If someone understands him, if someone translates him in front of everyone, he's finished. She understood what he was asking. You want me to stand up in that room and expose him? You're the only one who can, Jean-Baptiste said. You're the only one who knows every word he said. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she nodded. I'll do it. He looked at her for a moment, admiration flickering behind his steady eyes. If they try to silence you, don't stop. Speak until they have to listen. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, repeating phrases in her mind. English, French, German, Spanish, sign. Her 5 voices sharpening into one. Before dawn, she pressed her lips to Luce's forehead. This time she signed, I'll speak for both of us. By morning, the city was alive with cameras and polished cars. The Harrington mansion gleamed under the gray light. Inside, journalists gathered under the same chandeliers that had witnessed her humiliation. The contract sat on a crystal table, waiting for signatures. Emily entered through the front door. She didn't hide. She walked with quiet purpose, her uniform immaculate, her eyes clear. Karen turned pale. What are you doing here? Finishing what I started, Emily said. Get out! Before she could call security, Daniel appeared behind her, adjusting his cufflinks. Let her stay, he said. Maybe he wanted to seem gracious. Maybe guilt had already begun to whisper in his ear. The event began. Brenner stepped to the podium, smiling for the cameras. This partnership will bring hope to children across America, he said in flawless English. Applause filled the room. Then, with a quick glance at Daniel, he shifted into German, his tone suddenly sharp and private. If only he knew half the money will be ours. The words hit Emily like a strike of lightning. Her pulse surged. Across the room, Jean-Baptiste met her eyes. He gave a small nod. Emily took one step forward, her voice steady but strong. Mr. Brenner, she said, would you repeat what you just said? The crowd went still. Cameras turned. Daniel frowned. What is she doing here? Brenner laughed. She must have misunderstood. I understood perfectly, Emily said in clear, flawless German. You said that half the money from this foundation would be yours. Gasps broke through the silence. Reporters lifted their cameras. Daniel turned sharply toward Brenner. What is she talking about? Brenner tried to smile. She's confused. She doesn't know German. Emily's voice rose, calm but unshakable. Ich verstehe dich sehr gut, Herr Brenner. I understand you very well, sir. Every head turned. The room felt suspended between disbelief and revelation. Jean-Baptiste stepped forward and raised a small flash drive. And there's footage, he said. Footage showing the bracelet being planted to destroy her credibility. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Brenner's mask cracked. Daniel's face drained of color. Emily stood in the center of the chaos, the same woman they had mocked, now the only one speaking truth. Daniel's voice trembled. If what she says is true, he said, this ends right now. Security moved toward Brenner. Karen tried to slip away, but the journalists surrounded her. The moment the cameras turned back, Daniel looked at Emily again. His voice broke. If you truly speak 5 languages, he said, then I owe you more than respect. I owe you an apology. Slowly, he sank to his knees, the memory of his own cruelty burning in his face. I'll kneel at your feet. Because you truly speak 5 languages, he whispered. The same words he had once thrown like an insult, now heavy with remorse. The room froze. Flashes of light flickered like lightning. Emily pressed the blue notebook to her chest, tears burning behind her eyes. "Please stand," she whispered. "Not until I've said I'm sorry," Daniel said, voice trembling. And for the first time, the ballroom that had once laughed at her fell completely silent. The silence inside the ballroom was almost sacred. The same hall that had echoed with laughter now held its breath. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered into microphones, and every eye turned toward the woman who had once been invisible. Daniel Harrington stayed on his knees. "All my life," he said quietly, "I believed power meant being heard. But you've shown me that true power is in listening." Emily stood still, clutching her blue notebook. Her uniform was the same one she'd worn when they mocked her, but now it felt like armor. "I didn't want to humiliate you," she said softly. "I only wanted the truth to be heard." A murmur spread through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Jean-Baptiste stood near the doorway, a quiet guardian, his eyes proud. Across the room, Ava Harrington's face was wet with tears. She remembered the rain-soaked bus stop, the stranger who had handed her a plastic bag to protect her music. Now that same woman had protected her father's name, not with silence, but with truth. Security guards surrounded Klaus Brenner. His mask of arrogance was gone. "This is absurd," he shouted, switching between English and German. "You can't prove—" But Jean-Baptiste stepped forward, calm as stone, holding up the flash drive. "It's all here," he said. "Every second." The guards took Brenner's arms. He tried to twist free, but the struggle only made him smaller. As they led him away, his voice cracked into panic. "You'll regret this, all of you." His words dissolved into noise. Karen Pierce, pale and trembling, tried to slip through the crowd unnoticed, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Karen." She froze. He looked at her with tired eyes. "You framed an innocent woman. Why?" Karen swallowed hard. "She embarrassed you," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." "By lying?" Daniel's voice hardened. "You protected nothing. You destroyed everything that mattered." He turned to Emily again, shame deep in his voice. "What can I do to make this right?" Emily hesitated. She could have asked for money, position, justice, but she thought of Luce, the little girl who laughed with her hands, and the promise she had whispered to her late at night. "I'll find a way to give you a voice." "I don't want your money," she said finally. "I want your foundation to keep its promise. Help the children who can't hear. Give them what you promised." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "Then that's what we'll do. Starting today, the Harrington Hope Foundation will include programs for children with hearing disabilities. And," he added, turning to the cameras, "it will bear her name too. The Cruz Harrington Foundation." The applause began softly, first from Ava, then from the journalists, then from everyone in the room. Jean-Baptiste smiled, his expression quiet but fierce. Emily's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. That afternoon, the world changed. Within hours, news spread across every platform. Housekeeper exposes million-dollar fraud. 5 languages, 1 voice. The woman who spoke truth to power. By evening, Brenner was under arrest. Karen was dismissed from the mansion and escorted out in silence. Reporters camped outside the Harrington estate, but Emily didn't stay to bask in it. When she walked out the front door, Jean-Baptiste followed her just long enough to say, "You didn't just clean that house today, you cleansed it." She smiled faintly. "And now I can breathe." He nodded, eyes warm. "The world needed to hear you." That night, Emily returned home. Luce was waiting by the window, her small hands trembling with anticipation. When Emily walked in, her sister ran to her and wrapped her arms tight around her waist. "What happened?" she signed quickly. Emily smiled through tears. Her hands moved slowly. gracefully. They believed me. It's over. Luce touched her chest. You were brave. Emily signed back. We were brave. The next morning, a black car stopped in front of their small apartment. Daniel Harrington stepped out, holding a white envelope. He didn't bring cameras or journalists, only Ava, who carried a small bouquet of white lilies. Emily opened the door, surprised. Daniel took a breath. I came to keep my word, he said, handing her the envelope. Inside was a letter stamped with an official seal. It's from the German embassy, he explained. Ava helped arrange it. It's an invitation, a scholarship program for language educators in Berlin, a full scholarship. They said your story inspired them. Emily stared at the letter, speechless. The paper trembled in her hands. Ava smiled. Mrs. Klein would be proud, she said softly. Emily's eyes filled again. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me what I always wanted, a chance to teach others that language is power. Daniel nodded, humbled. No, he said. Thank you for teaching me that truth still matters. When they left, Emily sat on the couch beside her sister, still holding the letter. Luce watched her hands and signed, What does it say? Emily smiled through her tears. It says, We got a scholarship. We're going to learn together. Luce's eyes widened, her hands flying with joy. Really? Together? Together, Emily signed. That night, the city lights flickered through the thin curtains of their apartment. Emily opened her blue notebook, the one filled with words she had learned across so many years and jobs. On the last page, she wrote slowly, her hand steady. I spoke, and the world understood. She looked at the tin can on the shelf, the one that had once held her dream, labeled with a single word scratched in black ink. Scholarship. The light from the window caught it, making it shimmer softly. She smiled. In that moment, she realized something powerful. The world had not changed overnight. She had. The girl who used to whisper words in the dark had become a woman who spoke light into the world. Language had given her a way out. Dignity had given her wings. And love, quiet, patient, and unbreakable, had given her the courage to use them. Berlin smelled like rain and bread. The air was colder, cleaner, and it seemed to hum with the echo of languages Emily had once only dreamed of speaking. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the cleaning woman standing in the shadows of someone else's mansion. She was a student, a teacher in training, a woman with her own name printed on an official document from an embassy. When she stepped off the plane, her hands trembled, clutching her sister's fingers. Luce looked around with wonder, her small eyes wide at the sight of snow for the first time. Emily bent down and signed, It's called snow. It's like rain, but softer. Luce smiled, her silent laughter glowing in the winter light. Their first apartment was small, one room, a single window, an old heater that hissed through the nights. But to Emily, it was a palace. On the walls, she hung the words she had carried across continents. Speak, even if the world doesn't understand yet. The phrase that Mrs. Klein had written years ago now looked back at her in the very city where it had been born. During the day, Emily attended classes at the Institute for Linguistic Inclusion, where she studied pedagogy, translation, and sign language education. Her professors were fascinated by her story, but Emily never tried to impress anyone. She simply listened, learned, and absorbed every new sound with the same hunger she'd had as a maid in New York. She practiced pronunciation until late at night, reading aloud under the dim light, while Luce did her homework beside her. When her sister grew tired, Emily would trace words in the air with her hands, teaching her the sign for each new one. They learned together German, English, American Sign Language, and even the German Sign Language that Luce loved for its graceful rhythm. Months passed, and Emily's quiet dedication began to ripple beyond the classroom. Her teachers invited her to share her story at a local school for children with hearing disabilities. She was terrified at first, afraid her accent or her shyness would betray her. But when she stood before the children and began to sign, the fear melted away. "My name is Emily," she said, signing as she spoke. "I grew up in a place where people thought silence meant weakness, but I learned that silence can speak louder than noise." The children watched her hands with wide eyes. Luce sat in the front row, her smile like sunlight. Emily continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "Language isn't just sound, it's connection. It's dignity. It's the bridge we build when the world tries to divide us." When she finished, the room fell still. Then one small boy stood and began to clap, not with sound but with the silent applause of open hands waving in the air. Soon the entire class joined him. Emily felt her throat close with tears. She looked at Luce and thought, "We made it." That night she wrote in her blue notebook, "Today, I taught children who speak with light." Mrs. Klein was right. The music of words never dies. It just finds new instruments. The following months brought letters from across the world. Journalists, teachers, and organizations reached out to her. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted to invite her to speak at conferences about education and equality. She accepted only one invitation, a modest one from a local radio program in Berlin. On the day of the interview, the host introduced her warmly. "Today we have with us Emily Cruz, a remarkable woman whose courage exposed corruption and whose voice is changing how we understand communication." Emily smiled nervously and leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I didn't do it alone. Every word I spoke was built from the voices of others, my teacher, my sister, a friend who believed in justice. I just carried their echoes." The host leaned in. "Do you believe in destiny?" Emily thought for a long moment. "I believe destiny gives us moments, but it's up to us whether we speak or stay silent." When she walked home that evening, the sky above Berlin glowed pale gold. Snow drifted around the streetlights like quiet confetti. Luce ran ahead, laughing silently, spinning in the falling light. Emily followed her, smiling, remembering a night long ago in a glittering ballroom where she'd stood trembling, mocked for speaking the truth. Now she walked freely. The world had heard her once. Now it listened. Weeks later, a letter arrived with an American postmark. It was from Daniel Harrington. "Dear Emily, the foundation is thriving. We've opened new centers in New York, Los Angeles, and Boston. Each one includes a program for hearing-impaired children. Your idea. The first group graduated last week. They signed their speeches, and I thought of you. I know I can't erase what happened, but I hope you'll believe that your courage changed us. Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it." Emily read the letter twice, her hands shaking. Then she passed it to Luz, who read it and smiled. He changed. She signed. Emily nodded. "Because truth can change people," she replied, "even the proud ones." That evening, she walked to the Spree River with her notebook. The water was dark and calm, reflecting the city's lights. She opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, "Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it into purpose. I once thought I needed to be heard. Now I know I only needed to speak." She closed the notebook, slipped it into her coat pocket, and looked up at the stars peeking through the Berlin clouds. Somewhere, she believed, Mrs. Klein was smiling. The next morning, Emily received another letter, this one from Jean-Baptiste. His handwriting was strong, careful. "Mon ami," it began, "I'm back in Haiti, helping rebuild a small school. The children here remind me of the day you found your voice. They clean the floors with laughter. I tell them about you, the woman who turned humiliation into light. If you ever visit, there will be a place for you here." Emily pressed the letter to her heart. Her story had crossed oceans now, living in other tongues, other hands, other hearts. That night, she signed a promise to Luce. When we finish our studies, we'll travel the world. We'll teach languages where people have forgotten how to listen. Luce nodded, her small fingers dancing in the air. And we'll speak with light, she signed. Emily smiled. Always. The sisters turned off the light, the snow still falling outside, quiet and endless. Somewhere in the dark, between memory and hope, the hum of 5 languages blended into one, the language of dignity. Years later, the air above Manhattan shimmered with summer heat. The skyline was the same, tall, impatient, magnificent. But Emily Cruz saw it differently now. It was no longer the city that had swallowed her dreams. It was the city where she had learned to speak them aloud. She stood on the steps of the newly renamed Cruz Harrington Foundation for Inclusive Education, sunlight reflecting off the glass doors. Inside, reporters and volunteers hurried around preparing for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Children filled the courtyard, some laughing, some signing to each other, their hands flickering like small flames of joy. Luce was among them, now 16, graceful and confident, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She was teaching a little boy how to sign "thank you." Emily watched her with quiet pride. Everything they had lived through, the hunger, the humiliation, the endless nights of study, had brought them here. Daniel Harrington arrived moments later, older, thinner, humbled. He wore no designer suit this time, only a simple gray jacket. When he saw Emily, his face softened with something like reverence. "Miss Cruz," he said quietly, offering his hand. She smiled and took it. "Mr. Harrington." "You know," he said, glancing at the laughing children, "I used to think building schools was about giving money. Now I know it's about giving second chances, to others, and to yourself." She nodded. "You learned the most important language of all, Daniel." He raised an eyebrow. "Which one is that?" "Humility." They both smiled. When the cameras were ready, Daniel called the crowd to attention. "Years ago," he said, "a young woman taught me what real courage sounds like. I humiliated her in front of 100 people. Today, she stands here not as my employee, but as the co-founder of this foundation, the woman whose vision gave hundreds of children a voice." Applause rose, rolling like thunder through the courtyard. Emily felt tears slip down her cheeks. When she stepped forward to speak, she didn't reach for the microphone immediately. Instead, she looked around at the children, the parents, the faces she once feared would never listen. "When I first came to this country," she said softly, "I believed that silence was survival. But silence isn't peace. It's surrender. The day I spoke the truth, I thought I would lose everything. Instead, I found my voice, and through it, I found all of you." She paused, lifting her hands to sign as she spoke, so Luce and the others could follow her words. Language is not only sound, it's kindness, it's courage. It's the bridge we build between pain and understanding. Every child here deserves to cross that bridge. The crowd stood in silence, many wiping tears. Daniel took the scissors and handed them to her. Together they cut the blue ribbon. The children cheered with their hands, silent applause that shimmered like light in the sun. Later that afternoon, after the crowd dispersed, Emily walked alone through the hallways of the new building. Each classroom door bore a word in a different language: hope, esperanza, Hoffnung, espoir, esperanza, all meaning the same thing. The walls were painted in soft colors, and on one of them hung a framed quote in elegant calligraphy: "Speak, even if the world doesn't understand yet." Underneath the words was a small brass plate engraved with the name Marta Klein. Emily touched it gently, whispering, "We did it, Señora." She walked to the courtyard where Luce and Jean-Baptiste were talking. He had come all the way from Haiti for the opening, his broad smile as steady as she remembered. "I told you," he said, "the world would listen one day." She laughed softly. "You were right." They sat together on a bench, watching Luce teach two younger children how to sign the alphabet. The sunlight spilled across their faces, warm and forgiving. "Do you ever miss the old life?" Jean-Baptiste asked. Emily shook her head. "Sometimes," she said, "because pain has its own language too. It taught me strength." He nodded. "And you translated it into hope." A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying laughter, bits of conversation, and the hum of life. Emily leaned back, closing her eyes, feeling the peace that had once seemed unreachable. When evening came, the city glowed with gold. She returned home and opened her old blue notebook one last time. The pages were worn, filled with phrases in 5 languages and notes from every place she had ever been. At the very end, under her last entry, she wrote in English, then translated it into each tongue she knew. "Forgiveness is the language the soul never forgets. El perdón es el idioma que entiende el alma. Le pardon es la langue que le cœur se souvient toujours. Vergebung ist die Sprache, die Seele nie vergisst." And in sign, just light. She closed the notebook and placed it beside the tin can she'd kept all these years. The same can, dented and old, still carried the word scratched by her younger self. Scholarship. Now it shone in the dim light, a small relic of the girl who had refused to stop dreaming. Luce entered quietly, signing, "You're crying." Emily smiled, wiping her tears. "No," she signed back. "I'm speaking with light." Outside, the city buzzed, indifferent and alive. But in that small apartment, 2 sisters sat at a table surrounded by books, notebooks, and soft laughter, the quiet sound of dreams fulfilled. Emily looked at her sister and then at the world beyond their window. "Do you know what the most beautiful thing about learning languages is?" she said aloud. Luce tilted her head. "It's realizing that every word, no matter how different, means the same thing when it's spoken with love." Luce smiled and touched her chest, the sign for heart. Emily returned the gesture. And in that moment, with 5 languages and 1 unbreakable bond, they spoke the only one that mattered. Thank you for walking with us through this journey of dignity, memory, and rebirth. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, we'd love for you to stay. There are still so many stories waiting to be told, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that a second chance can come when we least expect it. Subscribe, leave a like, and help us keep sharing these moments of hope and humanity. Your presence here means more than words can say. Until next time, stay gentle, stay strong, and keep believing.